You remember that insane trillion-dollar mirrored city that was supposed to slice right through the Saudi desert for 170 kilometers? Yeah, that one. Well, it just got its final verdict, so let's get into it. Welcome to the autopsy.
On September 16th, the 10 most powerful men in Saudi Arabia pretty much declared the line project dead. I mean, they carved it up, they handed out the pieces, and they left the carcass right at the foot of Mount Horeb, which, is the very mountain where Moses supposedly spoke to God.
This whole situation feels a lot like that classic movie Sunset Boulevard, where you have a dead body floating in a pool narrating its own story, because that's basically what's happening here. And to get why, you have to understand this really important concept in Saudi culture, waj. It means your face, your reputation. And admitting failure in public, that's seen as worse than death. So you're never, ever going to hear an official announcement that the line is canceled. It's just going to keep floating in that pool, winking at us, pretending it's still alive.
Look, the best way to understand this whole thing is to think of it like a grand magic trick. And every great magic trick has 3 acts. The first part is called the pledge. This is where the magician shows you something that looks, well, totally ordinary. It's all about setting the stage for the big illusion. And what's so wild is that the first plan for the line back in 2021 was actually kind of brilliant. It was this idea for 5 separate, totally buildable city modules, all linked up by a long metro line. Urban planners, they loved it. It was practical. But then the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, decided that practical wasn't going to cut it. No, he wanted a spectacle. He wanted something that would grab headlines all over the world. So how did it go from practical to completely impossible? Well, it was a 2-step process, and it seems like it was inspired by the Marvel movies that MBS is a huge fan of. First up, Thanosfication. They hired a concept artist who literally took those 5 horizontal cities and folded them up into one single vertical megastructure. Then came Wakandafication. They took the original 170-kilometer length and slapped 500-meter-tall mirrored walls on it. The result? A project that just completely defied the laws of physics, but man, was it perfect for misdirection. And to sell this impossible dream, they built the world's longest billboard. For 18 straight months, you had these endless lines of trucks and excavators digging a 120-kilometer trench across the desert. You could see it from space. It was all just one giant marketing campaign to get investors on board. But the investors didn't bite. When we visited not long ago, the whole place was a ghost town. It was all packed up, like a movie set after the camera stopped rolling.
Okay, so that brings us to Act 2, the turn. This is the moment where the magician takes that ordinary thing and makes it do something extraordinary. And in our story, this is where a very conservative sovereign wealth fund starts paying for completely impossible dreams.
So all of the kingdom's money is managed by the Public Investment Fund, the PIF, and it has this one sacred rule. You never, ever touch the principal savings. You only spend the interest. But MBS's wish list was enormous, so he came up with this really audacious workaround. He just stopped calling his projects expenses. Instead, he started calling them investments. And just like that, with that one little word change, he could tap into the main fund itself. Now, the PIF wasn't stupid. They laid down 2 really tough conditions. First, he had to find co-investors to share the cost and the risk. Well, we already saw how that went with the big ditch. Total failure. The second condition was even tougher. If you can't find partners, the project has to promise a 9% annual return on investment. Now, just to put that in perspective, the industry average for a fancy resort is maybe 4%. A 9% return is, well, it's pretty much mathematically impossible.
So how on earth did they hit that 9% target? Well, they hired a bunch of consultants, and they cooked the books. This glamping site at the Trojena Ski Resort is the perfect example. The original estimate for a nightly stay was about $216. To get that magic 9% return, the consultant simply readjusted it to $704 a night. Yeah. And this wasn't just a one-time thing. This was happening all across these massive gigaprojects.
The Wall Street Journal, I think, said it best. They called it a mutual dance of delusion. You had MBS on one side demanding impossible architecture, and you had the PIF on the other side demanding impossible profits. NUX'S management was just stuck right in the middle, forced to play along with this fantasy just to keep the lights on. And this contrast in who was in charge really tells you everything. Over at NUX'S, the leadership created this totally toxic culture. They hired consultants just to protect their waj, their reputation, and they would fire any engineer who had the guts to say, hey, this is impossible. Unsurprisingly, their first project, Sindala, was delivered late and way over budget. Now compare that to John Pagano over at Red Sea Global. He kept all the development in-house, he figured out how to give MBS his cool, viral buildings, but at the same time he gave the PIF what they wanted, profitable real estate. Pagano won, Neom failed, and in the end, he was the one who was rewarded with control over what was left of Neom.
And that, my friends, brings us to the final act, the prestige. This is the part of the trick where the magician brings the object back. It's the big reveal. Because while all of us were looking at these impossible buildings, something else, something much bigger was happening. You see, the buildings were never the point.
So when the pious auditors finally came in and uncooked the books, they buried the bad news deep, deep inside their annual report. This mysterious $44 billion write-off just appeared with absolutely zero explanation. It was the first real sign that the illusion was officially over.
All right, so total spending across all of MBS's giga projects had hit something like $100 billion before this massive write-off. And that just begs the question, where did all that money actually go? So if you look at this breakdown, you see these huge losses everywhere. $15 billion just on basic infrastructure, $6 billion at the port city of Oxagon. It goes on and on. But the part that is truly shocking is right there at the bottom. The line, the global centerpiece, the project that got all the media attention, only accounted for $5 billion of the write-off. I mean, a tiny fraction. So if the line wasn't the main event, what was?
And right here, this is the real magic trick. While the world's media, and let's be honest, all of us, were completely distracted by mirrored walls and giant ditches, a massive, profound transformation was happening behind the curtain. In February 2022, at the exact same time the line's crazy spectacle was being unveiled, Wahhabism, the extremist religious doctrine that had basically ruled Saudi society for centuries, was officially removed from the nation's founding story. The distraction was working perfectly.
And NBS was incredibly blunt about why he did it. He said it himself. He knew that if he wanted to bring in foreign capital, if he wanted tourists, if he wanted to create millions of jobs for his people, he had to completely uproot the extremist ideology that was holding the country back. The impossible architecture of Neom, it was just the cover he needed to perform radical surgery on his own society.
So the magic trick is complete. What happens now? Well, the PIF, which had let the distraction do its job, stepped back in and reasserted control. And a new, much more practical reality started to set in.
MBS had one last card up his sleeve, what we're calling the deadline doctrine. He went out and secured these huge international events, like the 2029 Asian Winter Games and the 2034 World Cup. He thought these hard deadlines would force the PIF to keep the money flowing for his vision. But the PIF was smarter. They just quietly ordered the contractors to slow walk everything. Suddenly, there was no way they could meet the deadlines. The Olympic Committee started looking for other hosts, and just like that, MBS lost all his leverage. The PIF could renegotiate everything.
So this is what Neom looks like today. It's basically been dismantled for parts. The pieces that actually work, like Sandala, have been handed over to competent managers like John Pagano. Key assets are being sold off, other projects are being dramatically downsized, and the line itself, it's been put into what you could call indefinite cryosleep.
But that leaves us with one last absolutely fascinating mystery. Out of all the vast empty desert in Saudi Arabia, why stage this entire multi-trillion-dollar magic trick right here? In the ancient land of Midian, at the foot of the exact mountain where Moses encountered the burning bush?
When you look at the clues, it really starts to paint a picture. This land is where the name of God, Yahweh, first shows up in recorded history. MBS literally built his personal palace on Mount Horeb. Some of the project's elements are being built right on top of ancient holy sites. And there's this massive rewilding project that's healing the desert, planting over 1 million trees. It makes you wonder. Maybe MBS wasn't just trying to build a city for the future. Maybe he was trying to terraform a holy site, to upgrade God's own infrastructure.
So in the end, we're left with this question. Was the whole spectacle of the line with all of its impossible dreams and all of that incredible cost just a massive, spectacular failure? Or was that $100 billion the price of a funeral for an extremist ideology? And maybe, just maybe, the necessary cost for the rebirth of an entire nation. That right there is the real prestige of the trick. And it's definitely something to think about.